What's up, guys? I am here today with Travis Chappell. He is the host of the Build Your Network podcast, which has millions of downloads and is a top 25 business podcast on Apple Podcasts. I challenge you guys to pause, go over to Discover, and you will find his podcast right there. Outside of that, he is also the founder of World Class Media and also most recently Guestio. He also offers speaker and coaching services. This man is all over it. He's actually somebody that I reached out to right when I started the podcast through also another guest who's been on the show. So Travis, thank you for coming on. We're finally doing this, man.
Jake, what's up, bro? Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So how I want to start this off is it's going to be actually the opposite of how you do your show, because you always build context and start from the beginning. I'm actually, and a little bit more selfishly, interested on your most recent project, which is called Guestio. And so I just want you to kind of explain what it is, what problems you're addressing, and what solutions you're offering.
Yeah, man. So Guestio basically came out of necessity. I find usually the best entrepreneurial ideas come out of kind of scratching your own itch, and that's definitely what this was. Basically, since I started my show, I was always trying to reach up and get the best level guests that I possibly could get on my show. And it's just a difficult process. And I'm sure as you're figuring out, like it takes a long time to build relationships, to get introductions to people, to find emails, to do cold reach out, to see if gatekeepers are going to let you through. Like it takes months of being persistent and getting rejected and sending cold messages and just all this stuff. It's just a long, arduous process. And so when people started reaching out to me and asked me, hey, how'd you get this person on? How'd you get that person on? How'd you get this other person on? When I came across those questions, I would tell them the answer. And the bottom line is it's a lot of work, but most people don't have that much time, or just flat out aren't willing to put in that amount of effort to get those kinds of results. So we built Guestio basically be the solution for that, where you can go on there and you can book high quality guests for your show directly onto the site. And we make sure that they're high quality because they're paid to be there. Like they're paid by the host to get them onto their show. So it's actually worth their time. They don't have to go through layers of research and, stick their gatekeepers on you. They don't have to do any of that stuff, because if you're paying for their time that they set on the platform, like the amount of money that they set on the platform for an interview, then they know 100% that it's going to be worth their time. Because even if your show just started, you get 12 downloads an episode. If you pay to have them on their show, they know that it's not a waste of time.
Yeah, it's almost like when you start navigating the social ladder, which is podcasting, it's almost like a resume builder when you have a high level guest on there, and it's like a social status signal towards that you can at least hold your own. But this is kind of a way to, I guess, skip some of those processes and just find your way into the mix of the podcasting world.
It's a credibility booster, is what it is. It brings authority into the content that you're putting out there. And the thing is, they don't even have to be like the crazy A-list celebrity type people. You just want to get the A-listers that are in your space, that are in your world. Like if you're a marketer, you want to get the top marketers. If you are in, the fitness industry, you want to go get the top fitness people. You want to get the people that everybody knows, likes, and trusts in that space, because that's only going to bring more credibility, recognition, authority into your brand, which will enable you to be able to sell products and services, which will in turn enable you to be able to grow your show through advertising and not losing money that way. So it's just, to me, it starts there. It's what I call the credibility first method rather than the credibility last method, which is really what everybody else does. And something that we teach within this podcast Profit Academy, which is our course and community that we have for podcasters to learn how to grow and monetize their podcasts. There's a ton of courses out there that are all about starting a show and getting it to 30, 40, 50 episodes. But there's not a lot of courses out there that teach you, all right, now that I have the show running and I got some credibility, some authority, how do I take that and take it to the next level? How do I get more downloads? How do I get more subscribers? How do I get more revenue coming in on the show so that I can afford to grow the show and then be able to get sponsors and make this actually like a full-time type thing? So that's what we teach in there, is that credibility first method, because we think that credibility comes first. And then you can kind of take that credibility and leverage that into doing the other things that you want to be able to do for your show.
Do you think that this kind of solidifies the scale of where the podcasting world is going in this pay for play kind of method? Because for the most part and through the majority of time, it's always been, like you said, through this kind of strenuous process of going through all these gatekeepers and processes to do this. But now you're bringing people who probably haven't been in the podcasting world that are going to eventually be guests on some people's show. So this opens more opportunities and kind of solidifying the podcast space as maybe the next kind of YouTube influencer kind of thing that's going to be happening.
Yeah, it's all about access. People want access to other people. And in order for that to work, it has to be worth the time of the person whose time is the most valuable in that situation. And so that's why you get ignored. That's why you don't get messaged back. That's why it takes months to get a hold of these people. It's not because they're just jerks. It's just because they literally have so many demands on their time. It would be impossible for them to, accept every single request for a call or an interview or whatever that they get coming across their table. So it would just be too much. It'd be too crazy. And so instead, having it done this way is you can just pay for access to them, because then it, like I said, it just makes it to where they know that it's worth their time. So I don't know if it'll, change the face of the industry in that type of a regard. I just think that it gives people exactly what they want, which is access. And if you can't or won't put in the effort to earn access, then you can just pay for access.
As far as the underlying software that's attached to Guestio, I previously have gone down that route before as well. I created a ticket verification platform, so I kind of know how tough that is. Is all of this software, scheduling, booking, everything like that is all native to Guestio?
Yep. Yeah, we built it all from scratch.
Wow, that's really cool, man. Like I said before, I've been in the beta and I've kind of bounced around. I saw that you had Manny Pacquiao on there, which is a huge name. I'm sure he's not too familiar with the podcasting game, but some 1-2 punches, which will land some people for the show.
Yeah, it was a big win for us, man, to be able to bring somebody on with obviously a household name like that. So that's kind of the hope, that we can continue to bring on more and more people that are at that caliber.
Hey, man, I'm very excited for it. I think that it is something that is definitely needed. It kind of reminds me of like the podcasting form of Cameo, which has kind of grown to a Goliath ranks, where a lot of influencers were going on, or people were trying to get influencers to, say their name or get some sort of credibility that way. But this way, it's a little bit longer conversations, and who knows, maybe you can build some sort of network that isn't just, saying happy birthday for some of your best friends.
Right. Exactly. It gives you a little bit more of a connection, a little bit more of an interaction with that person.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So now we can, do as you do and build some context for all of our listeners. So basically, obviously you're on this show, so you have some sort of relation to Vegas. Kind of give us the story of who Travis Chappell is leading up to landing in Las Vegas.
Sure. So kind of high level here. I grew up in a town called Lancaster, California. It's about 3.5 hours down the 15. And then you break off of the 15, go through Apple Valley and through what's that? Adelanto. So Apple Valley, Adelanto, through the desert, and then you end up in Lancaster. So in the Mojave Desert as well, but in California. And kind of a unique situation growing up, because I grew up kind of on a church campus, and that church that I was at from the time I was about 3 to the time I was about 21, 22, basically spent the majority of my life there in that entire time period. And it's just kind of this big bubble, basically, because the church was kind of a mega church of sorts. When we started going there, it was maybe like, 1,500 people, something like that. But then by the time I was, in my 20s, it was 6,000-7,000 member church. And so there was a school that went K through 12 on the campus, and there was a college on the campus as well, four-year college. So I went to kindergarten all the way through my senior year of college at that one campus. And so I ended up getting my degree in Bible and Church Ministries. But what ended up happening was my senior year, I was really deciding that, just figuring out that wasn't going to be the path for me, that it wasn't exactly the path that I wanted to continue to go down. And so I made a little bit of a pivot, I guess. And the only real thing that I'd experienced up at that point is door-to-door sales, because that's what I was doing in college. And So my wife and I moved up to Fresno to take this like part-time position at a church that didn't end up happening because I decided that by the time I got there, I decided that I didn't want to go down that path anymore. And I jumped into sales full time, door-to-door sales. And after a year or two of being pretty successful at that, from being as young as I was, to make a six-figure income in knocking doors to 100% commission in Fresno, what happened at the end of that first year that I made six figures was kind of counterintuitive to what most people would think would happen, because I totally was in a different mindset from what most people would have been in, which is, oh yeah, I'm 22, 23. I get to hang out with my friends all the time. I'm working 20 hours a week. I'm in $100,000. That seems like a pretty good deal, right? But for me, it was more, this was cool, but what about in 10 years from now? What about in 5 years from now? And I looked forward into the future and saw the version of my life where I was still knocking doors at that time. And not to put any door knockers down, because I still think that's a fantastic way to make a living. But I just knew that it wasn't for me, that's not where I was going to end up. And so for the first time in my life, I dove into personal development type things. That's when I came across podcasting and basically decided, yeah, I think this is going to be the next thing that I do. And so started do the process of like building the show out, hired a coach and everything. And around that time, my wife's dad ended up passing away at the age of 53, which is a big shock to us. And we didn't have a big support group in Fresno. And so my wife and I, after about 3 years, moved back down to Lancaster, where I was from. And we knew it wasn't going to be permanent, but we didn't know how impermanent it was going to be. We just knew that we didn't want to be there. There's not much happening there. It's kind of just like a dead end town that's going nowhere. It doesn't have any real business or real vision that pushes the city forward. It's just kind of a place that exists and doesn't give you any opportunity. So I knew that we didn't want to stay there very long. So we ended up being there for like 8 or 9 months after we moved back there. We basically just moved back there to be around friends and family, to give my wife a little bit more support, because I was traveling a good amount, trying to figure out what I was going to be doing. And so when we were in Lancaster that time, my brother-in-law had been living out in Vegas, in Henderson, for a little while. And what ended up happening was I started getting into podcasting. I started coming out to business events and stuff, and started, like every other month I was in Vegas for something. And when we were kind of just figuring out, look, we don't want to stay in Lancaster. So the options are basically, we either move to a part of California where it's actually worth paying the taxes to be here, like San Diego or Orange County or something like that by the beach. Or we get out of California, because we're getting kind of the worst of both worlds right now. We're paying California taxes, and we live in the desert where it's windy and hot all the time. And, it's just dusty, and like the people here aren't that great. The culture here isn't that great. There's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go. There's like one bar in town, there's just not a lot of stuff here. So we ended up basically deciding to move to Vegas, because when we came out to Vegas to go to some of those events, we'd stay with my brother-in-law, and he obviously lived off of the Strip. And so when we came to visit him and stay with him, we got to see the surrounding areas of Vegas and not just see the Strip, which really opened our eyes to like, oh, you know what, this is actually a pretty cool place. And we knew that we wanted to be in a zero state income tax state. And so it ended up working out really well for us to move out here, because we still had that proximity to, LA County, where I grew up, where a lot of my family was and stuff. But we're still pretty close to those things, but far enough away. And then zero state income tax, and my wife's brother lived here, so there was just a few different things that ended up coming into that equation. So we ended up moving to Vegas at the beginning of 2018. Still doing door to door at the time, and then about a year after that, moved into the podcasting world full time.
Well, first I have to say is that you were actually ahead of the game of the mass exodus out of California. So definitely a few steps ahead of that game. And it's funny that once you move out to Vegas, or a lot of people that do, they tend to realize like how normal it is outside of the Strip, right? I mean, it's basically a giant grid, but Henderson is literally its own fulfilling city. That's one of the fastest growing cities in the world, or in the United States, so to speak. So
yeah. And that's the big thing, man, is as locals now, we hardly ever go to the Strip. The only time we really go to the Strip is when friends are in town, and even less now that, COVID shut down a lot of that stuff, and there's no shows and the clubs aren't open and stuff like that. So it's even less than it used to be. But yeah, we just kind of realized, most people come to Vegas, they stay at the Strip for 3 days, and then they go home. They don't even ever see any other parts of Vegas. So yeah, when we came here, we were like, oh man, this is actually a pretty cool place. The Strip just also happens to be here,
It really is. Just to touch on the direct sales, and I've had a ton of people on here that actually have done direct sales, door to door, or the like MLM, multi-level marketing kind of niches. And you're one of the few that actually had success while in the program. But one trend that I've noticed is that many people who end up doing that at a young age, they kind of derive those skills that they learned through these different processes and businesses, and then end up being uber successful in some sort of coaching world, podcasting, entrepreneurship, and a lot of these other various be your own boss kind of businesses. What is it, do you think, about the direct sales and MLM that makes people so successful?
Yeah, I think several things. First off, sales cure all. So, and Mark Cuban says that all the time. And so for any business, any entrepreneurial venture, you have to have sales. You have to have sales coming into your business. And so if you can sell, then you can pump oxygen back into your business at any time manually. You might have to do it yourself. There might be a lot of heavy lifting. It might be hard work. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm saying that you have that skill set that will enable you to be able to make some of these entrepreneurial ventures happen, or maybe last a little bit longer, or give you a longer runway because you have the ability to sell. So that's the first thing. But really one of the biggest overarching principles that applies to so many things is the ability to handle rejection. And I was listening to Guy Raz, who hosts How I Built This from NPR, a really well-known business podcast. And he recently came out with this book, How I Built This. That's like all the things he's learned from interviewing all these amazing entrepreneurs on How I Built This show. And he did this big podcast tour. A lot of people that I know interviewed him for their shows. And so one of the things that people were asking him is, hey, what are some of the common denominators that you've seen from all these people you've interviewed? And one of the biggest things that keeps coming back to is that all of those people learned how to handle rejection at some point, because every entrepreneur is going to face loads of rejection. If you can't deal with it, if you can't handle it effectively, if you can't move past it, or turn it into something that's good for you, then you're going to struggle a lot. And it was interesting to hear someone like Guy Raz, who interviews like the top entrepreneurs in the world, right? Like these aren't people who are just like running some ads to a ClickFunnels page. Like these are people who are like changing the world with their businesses. And these are the people that he's talking about that are saying like they can handle rejection like other people cannot handle rejection. And so I think there's a direct correlation when you're doing direct sales, if you're trying to sell supplements, or if you're trying to go door to door selling alarms or solar or whatever it might be, that there is a direct correlation to the amount of rejection that you can handle and how successful that you'll be later on in life as well. Because every unconventional path is going to be faced with loads of rejection, and your ability to handle that rejection is going to depict how well you'll be able to do in that venture. Interesting.
I think there's a ton of truth to that. There's a phrase too that I was thinking about while you're discussing that I learned recently, which is called learning in public. And that kind of correlates with direct sales and facing rejection, and also in podcasting, because let's be honest, when you first start podcasting, you're going to be terrible, and it's about accepting it and kind of just gutting up and rolling with it, and then building the community around you because they know that you're vulnerable and they support you, and then you're able to go on and kind of build whatever project you are into the fruition and kind of ideals that you want.
Yeah, for sure, man. Podcasting was the biggest risk of, social capital because it is so public. You are literally putting yourself out there. That's the definition of what a podcast is like talking into a microphone and putting it out there. Like there is no, but any sort of creative stuff for performers, like people that dance, people that sing, podcasters, creators. These are like the most epic forms of potential embarrassment coming down the pike because it's so public. So like people can witness your demise. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's what prevents a lot of people from doing it, unfortunately, is other people's opinions. And if you're so focused on other people's opinions, it might prevent you from jumping into something like that, which is totally understandable. And at the end of the day, though, for me, it was just about the fact that I knew that I would not be happy with myself if I didn't give it a shot. And then I knew that if I committed to giving it a shot and went all in and giving it a shot, that I would be able to create some success, or maybe some other people left success on the table because they weren't willing to do the work that I was willing to do. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, these things are you're putting yourself out there in a big way, and you could fail super publicly, which is what makes it really scary. And that's what makes it easy to say no to it too, because it's a lot easier to talk about your podcast instead of doing a podcast,
Yes.
because until you do it, it's just an idea. Until you do it, it can be as successful as you think it could be. You know what I mean? Like, it's still a possibility that, you know, oh, my dreams, I'll go after my dreams one day. They're there, and I'm going to start this podcast and all these other things. And you think along those lines. And if you don't take any action, you can always talk about how you would have been really great at it if you just would have done it. You know, I just should have done it because I would have really crushed it with that. When you do it, there's no more guessing. It either works or it doesn't work. And by the way, I'm not saying that that's up to luck or fate. So there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. But what I am saying is, like, once you launch, there's no more talking about how successful it could have been had you not launched, because you launched. So now it's a matter of like, well, I put my dreams out there and I really hope that this happens. But if it doesn't, I'm kind of screwed, and a lot of people are going to know about it. But that's, you know, part of the game.
Yeah, you transfer from that what if mindset where a lot of people have, and that's kind of what lies with me, is at the end of the day, when you're on your deathbed, you think about the things that you didn't do more so than the things that you actually did do. So you're switching it from what if to will do. And once you start doing it, you start realizing how many different skills you need through the process. When you start a podcast, you think, oh, I can just talk to any person. You have to face rejection. You have to learn how to video edit, social media marketing, learn equipment. There's all these small nuances that you don't realize, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper until all of a sudden 4 or 5 months later, you're just doing everything in autopilot, and you realize that it's becoming natural to you, because at the end of the day, it's more so it's a skill than it is a natural born ability.
Exactly. Yeah. People are stuck in the fixed mindset, man, where you believe that you are just given the tools that you were given in life, and there's not much that you can do about changing those, rather than being on the growth mindset, which allows you to say, hey, I was given these tools. These are the results that I want. What actions do I need to take in order to be able to add on to the tools that I currently have to be able to achieve the things that I want? And then going and doing those things. That's the big difference there.
Yeah, there's also a ton of trial and error. There's so many things that I've already tried. I'm glad that I tried it, and then I'm like, all right, this is not going to work. I'm just going to throw it away forever. But I'm glad that I went through it, because you have to be able to associate the mental influxations of failures and successes to kind of understand, to be able to put yourself in that mindset. So it's really cool to do. And there's also a question that I'm interested in is, along your past when you first started, and now that you have, you know, a lot of success, millions of downloads, and all these different affiliate businesses, entrepreneurial degrees, was there a specific moment or episode that you realized where you're like, all right, I think this idea, this podcast is able to scale, and that I'm going to need some outside help to be able to push my idea forward?
You know, not really. I always thought about it in those terms before, because I was just like, man, if I could just get this one person, if I could get that person to say yes to an interview, and if they posted on their Instagram and like this thing would take off, I'm going to be famous and all this stuff. And it just never worked. Like it worked in terms of, you know, you get bumps in those episodes, but then next episode, it's going to go back down. And it was so frustrating at first, because it was like, I felt like I was spinning my wheels, man. I was just like, I putting in a year of work. I was doing 3 interviews a week, like getting all these interviews out, like trying to interview all these top people, and then actually getting them to say yes, and then interviewing them, and then getting them to say yes to posting on their social media that have 1 million followers. And it was like, wow, it's all happening. And I go check my numbers, and it was like, oh my goodness, like it's just, they're not that impressive. You know what I mean? And then, so it's basically just been a long, arduous journey of that exact thing, like a spike and then a drop. But this drop didn't go back down as far as the previous drop went back down. So it's like, you know, you go up and there's the plateau, and then you spike. And then the second plateau after that spike is going to be a little bit higher than the last one was. And that's basically what it's been, man. It's just been, like I said, just an arduous, a tedious climb and a long journey, which is why I tell people, like, if you're going to get into podcasting, you better be in it for the long game, for the long haul, or you better have a lot of money to spend in marketing, or you better have like a large resume or existing following somewhere else. And not even really a large resume. There's a lot of people who are really great at what they did before they got into podcasting, who just can't build audiences. Unless you're willing to dump loads of money into marketing.
That's something I've learned. It's not like YouTube where there's an AI algorithm that'll just continually feed into the related videos. There's more steps to go to a podcast. You know, you have to open up Apple Podcasts, you have to go to shows, you have to click the show, then you have to find the episode. There isn't an instant play. There's all kinds of different mechanisms to go to it. So the people that are actually listening are actually in it for you. And with podcasting, people are going to learn. I think it was like, there's a stat I saw from Buzzsprout where they said the average podcast listener makes on average 10,000 more than the person who doesn't. And that just shows that it's because people want to learn, and it's a new paradigm, because that's not something that YouTube or a lot of these other content creative platforms are offering. And this is more specifically a niche.
Podcast audiences are more educated and make more money than the general population. They also spend more time with you. 80% of podcast listeners say they listen to all or most of an episode after they hit play, whereas the average watch time on a YouTube video is 4 minutes and 20 seconds. So if you put a 30-minute YouTube video up and somebody watches it for 4 minutes, or you put a 30-minute podcast episode up and somebody listens to 26 minutes of it, which one of them puts you in front of that audience for a longer period of time? Which one of them helped you build trust with that audience? Deeper trust, faster, obviously the podcast. So there's a lot of advantages to podcasting, but to your point earlier, disadvantage of podcasting is discoverability. Discoverability sucks on podcasting comparatively to all the other platforms like Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or any of the other ones out there. So you kind of got to take the good with the bad, but I'd pick podcasting every day of the week.
It's my platform. That's all I listen to 90% of the day. I just tweeted the other day that in my quote unquote free time, all I do is listen to podcasts and then open up the dictionary and thesaurus to find words that I don't really know in my vocabulary, so that I can use it later down the road. And I was like, I don't know, is this entertainment, or can I consider this studying for podcasting?
Both. Both.
It's a great platform. There's something weird with, and I've been trying to figure this out as well. Maybe you have a little bit more insight on this, is that when it comes to podcasting, 6 months ago, before I started, a lot of these people that I talked to would never give you time of day. But once you put a microphone between you guys and say, instead of talking to you for small talk for 5 minutes, I want to talk to you for an hour, and publicize this, maybe even if it's to 5 people are increasingly more interested in coming onto the show. So I'm trying to figure out what that psychological mechanism is. Maybe it's something that's tied to fame, to distribution. I'm really unsure. Maybe, do you have any insight on this kind of idea?
Yeah, I think it's credibility and authority, and then it's potential distribution. It was a crazy thing to me when I realized the power of this, man, when I started my show back in the day. It's called Build Your Networks. We talk a lot about relationship building and connecting and all that kind of stuff. And the first time I was reaching out to these really big name guests that I was trying to get on my show, I went for a really small ask. And it showed, by the way, my complete lack of understanding of how people's time works, because I asked them, instead of getting them on my podcast, which was going to be a 30, 45-minute interview, I asked them for 3 minutes on a phone call. I was like, oh, it's just 3 minutes. This should be way easier. And to my surprise, they both got back to me and they were like, yeah, I don't do phone calls like that. One guy was like, yeah, well, I have a mastermind group. They pay me $35,000 a year to be in it, and it wouldn't be fair to them to give you a call because, that comes in the deliverables. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And the other guy was like, yeah, I don't do phone calls like that. But I was a little persistent from, door to door days probably. And so I remember I said something back to them. I don't completely remember the messages I sent. Was a few years ago, obviously now. But they replied back, and I said something about the podcast, or the podcast was in my email signature or something. And they both replied back and were like, hey, I'll do a podcast episode with you though. And it was just mind blowing to me that they would say no to a 3-minute phone call, but you'll say yes to a 40-minute Zoom or Skype call that I can record and upload to my show to share credibility that you've taken the last decade to build, or the other guy 3 or 4 decades to build. That's incredible that people, and right then it hit me that wow, this is a tool. This is a connecting tool. This is a networking tool. This is way more than just having the ability to create content or the ability to potentially create an income stream off of a passion of mine. This is way more than that. This is what's going to help me unlock the next level of my life, the next level of relationships with people that I want to chat with. This is huge, man. And that's why I told you before, I really liked your show idea, because I think that a lot more of these local type shows need to exist for people that are really trying to make a name in the local area. Because if you're the person that gets to be able to connect with all of these local leaders, then you can really become a go-to staple in that community, in that world. You know what I mean? So, yeah, props to you for realizing that and jumping on board.
I appreciate you for saying that. I always call it the go-to platform and discovery platform for Las Vegas. There's literally endless opportunity here, especially even when the strip opens up. You have 45 million people visiting here every year. So if once the show grows larger and people are aware, they're just like, hey, I'm in Vegas, come to your show. You know, I'll send you a pink limo or whatever the case is to be a little bit fancy about it. And you can have the show and build it more from there. So it's exciting. Yeah. It's really thrilling because I had this kind of existential crisis once I graduated college. And one of my good friends, we were talking about, like, how do you meet people when you graduate college? And as you were saying before, you have to offer some sort of tool, some sort of service to people. And because people are busy, you know, people want to watch Netflix all day and prioritize different things. Whereas like in college, everyone's still trying to figure out who they are. So it's much easier to blend together because you guys are still it's kind of like a vast bubble and not really as concise and distinct as you want to be. So when you approach podcasting and you give it some sort of service and you're able to connect in, you know, longer form conversations where, you know, we've been talking for 30 minutes and I feel like I've known you for longer than, you know, just a few months or even to the point of this conversation specifically. So it's a service that is becoming more and more popular and everyone is growing to have a podcast because they see the potential benefits. And not just from building a business, but from being able to grow your network that isn't just, you know, like my picture on Instagram.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely helps build more of those real, genuine relationships.
It is. So a question about your show. Why did you choose the 20 to 40 minute platform? As we see, like I do kind of a more longer form conversation, typically over an hour, 20 to 40. And sometimes there's even before I've been on like 10-minute podcasts. Yours seems to be the hot spot and happy medium in terms of length for a show. Is there a specific reason as to why you chose this?
Honestly, it just kind of came down to my sanity, bro. I was just doing too much. I really enjoy the longer conversations, to be honest. I really enjoy more like hour and a half type interview conversations. But yeah, we were just putting out so much content. And then, recently, my son is a year and a half almost. My daughter is due in like a month. And then we launched a course, an academy and mastermind community for podcast profit seekers, and then launched the software platform. And it was just so much stuff that it was just like I gotta say goodbye to something. So, you know, cutting the episode time down by about half was really helpful, and then letting go of a couple other like parts of the business that were more drains than they were helpful was part of that decision-making process as well. But yeah, I honestly, I like the longer conversations better. It's just, yeah, it just got to the point where I was like, man, I'm spreading myself a little bit too thin and I gotta be.
It's smart. It's a business decision. And in terms of business, how vital is it to a podcaster to be able to branch themselves outside of just podcasting and be able to kind of delve into other things associated, more popular, like coaching and masterminds and different unique niche opportunities?
Yeah, it just depends on your goals, man. That's a question that you have to ask yourself is what do you want to do? Like if you I was asking my clients this question, like fast forward 5 years, you have everything that you want. Like your podcast is as successful as you hoped it would be. Paint that picture for me. What does that look like? Does it look like having just a bunch of listeners and just living on sponsorship dollars? Does it look like, you know, helping your niche community of people with, marketing decisions they're trying to make? And does it look like, you know, running retreats in different parts of the world in helping couples with their relationships with each other? Like what is that thing for you? And then get started building toward that vision, whatever that's going to be, you know, and I would say get started with one of those things. Like if you're like, oh yeah, 5 years from now, I want to have a live event and I want to be speaking on stages and I want to have a mastermind and I want to have the course community, I want to have a community and I want to have I want to do coaching, I want to do all these things. Great. But start with one of those things. Don't start with all of those things, because you're going to get way too overwhelmed and it's not going to work. Chase two rabbits, you don't catch either one, right? So you got to start with one of those things and just push hard on one of those things. But yeah, the answer is really up to the person who's deciding. It's up to the person who's scripting the story, so to speak, because you're the only person who really knows where you want to end up. And the only thing I would say is always take stock of where you want to end up. Even if you feel like, sometimes people will do it once at the beginning and then 3 years in, they realize that, they accomplished the thing that they wanted to accomplish, and they look back and they're like, oh wait, I didn't even really want to be here anyway. So I try to do that pretty often, is always be taking stock of where I am and where I want to be. And then course correct along the way if you need to, and if not, then keep going down the path that you're going down.
Yeah, there's two keys. Yeah, make sure that you don't spread yourself too thin. I've definitely been a culprit of that multiple times throughout my life, because in this society, we live in a society of infinite leverage. So you're able to build multiple things on top of each other, and sometimes we look to start with step 3 when we need to kind of retract backwards and begin with step 1. So there is a lot of nuance to that, because it's a tough world out there. But something that I see more popular is that people when you find some sort of success with podcasting, people begin to approach you about kind of everyday questions and situations about being successful. They want to know first how to build a podcast, or like they just approach you with different ideas that aren't necessarily just podcasting, because you've built that credibility. So I think that is something that begins to flourish first, and then you kind of dive out of that credibility into other spaces where therefore you have to build credibility all over again.
Yeah. And then that's where coaching comes from, right? Is real life experience, and then being able to package knowledge in a way that is actually helpful and impactful for people. So, you kind of got to do some of that stuff for free for a while, and you kind of got to have your time being taken up by people for really low price points or for free when you're starting out, just to make sure that you're actually able to help people if you do start taking payments for those types of things. And if you start getting some real results for people, then you can start charging a little bit more for it. Then you can start charging a little bit more for it. And then your services will be more in demand. Then you can raise the price again. Like I'm not one of those people that's just like, go raise the price on everything right now, just because. I'm not one of those people. I think that you have to earn the right to raise the price, and not just because you can charge for something, charge a certain amount for something doesn't mean you should charge a certain amount for something. I think some people, just take advantage of that a little bit.
Yeah, you have to know your worth, but also don't price yourself out of your industry or out of your margins because of that.
Or out of the point where it ceases to be beneficial for the person that's paying you. You know what I mean? Like I said, just because you can sell somebody at a price point doesn't mean that you should sell them at that price point. I personally believe that. And a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but I just think that, that's how you end up with people who are holding resentment towards you after they work with you, rather than always constantly over delivering on everything.
It's true. So I actually have a fair amount of podcasters who listen to this show. So in regards of podcasts, is there something to look at as a metric outside of downloads to show some sort of sign of success in terms of, I guess, yourself and the show's growth?
Engagement. Whenever you have a small audience, the number one metric that you should be concerned with is just engagement. If you have a call to action on your show, how many people take advantage of it? Can you build a community of people on Facebook or on an email newsletter? Or can you get people to jump on a one-on-one phone call with you? Like, if you have small numbers, then don't worry about big numbers until you worry about engagement, because big numbers aren't going to come unless you engage the small numbers. You're not going to get a big audience without doing the things that don't scale. Like, you're not going to be able to not be able to do the unscalable things until you do the unscalable things, if that makes sense. So that's what I did, man. For the first year and a half, I jumped on 100+ one-on-one phone calls for free with anybody in my audience who was willing to jump on a one-on-one phone call with me. At first, I had to reach out to people. Nobody would book. And then people started booking a little bit, and then started booking a little bit more, and then started booking a little bit more. And then eventually I had to shut it down. But what that did was create real, not fake scarcity of my time to be like, oh, all my time's booked, but just create real scarcity of my time and say, I don't have time to jump on free phone calls anymore. And that's what allowed me to start charging more for my coaching, because it was like my time was literally too much in demand And just simple supply and demand economics demand that when something's in short supply and increased demand, then the value of that thing goes up. And so that's what ended up happening was just by offering those one-on-one phone calls and engaging with my audience, doing the things that don't scale, and building relationships on a one-to-one level. You know, people always ask me, how do you build an audience? How do you build an audience? The answer is you build it one at a time. One person at a time. Again, unless you're one of these other outliers, like if you're Dax Shepard or Jason Bateman and these people who build podcasts and get millions of downloads the next day because they already have large existing audiences, or like Reid Hoffman, who after he sold LinkedIn started Masters of Scale and was able to advertise the absolute crap out of it because he exited LinkedIn for $1 billion. You know what I mean? So unless you have an unlimited budget or you have fame or success or a large following elsewhere, then you build your audience one at a time. And you do that by building real relationships and adding real value to the lives of other people.
Wow. I like that. That's it's kind of a idea that I've done as well, where you can't be afraid to go out and send DMs on, Twitter, Instagram, let people know that you exist, because, as we grew up, people always like to say that, success will find you, but it's no, you have to go find success, and you have to get down in the nitty gritty and in the trenches and tell people what you're doing, and just strive off embarrassment of what you think might be embarrassing, because it's actually not. And people are actually a lot more supportive than you would think, like a ton more.
Yeah.
So I know you're a very busy man. So before we get out of here, I always ask 2 questions, same to everybody on the way out. First question is, the year is 2030. What does the ecosystem of Travis Chappell look like?
Oh, that's a loaded question, man.
There's just long-term view.
Yeah, I would like to have a couple different podcasts out there. I would like to be podcasting a little bit less about business and more about general life philosophy. My wife and I are planning on starting a podcast next year, and I'd like that to be like the bigger one with a bigger audience and a bigger show and reach. So that would be one thing. Doing some speaking, and I would really love at that point. It's my goal to be a New York Times bestselling author in the next decade. So that's a big thing, and then also to have a successful software exit from Guestio, or liquidation event, whatever that will be, a merger acquisition or a IPO or something like that. So that's all on the docket for me.
Oh, I love that thing. Good to have the grand plan. And the last question is, what does Las Vegas mean to you?
Las Vegas has really become home, man. My mom and dad had actually moved out here about a year and a half ago now, and so I a lot of my friends don't live back in Lancaster anymore. They're in San Diego and Santa Clarita and different parts of SoCal, and it's kind of scattered across. So I hardly ever go back to where I used to always call home. And so Vegas has really kind of stepped into that for me.
It's a beautiful, beautiful desert. Where can all of the listeners learn more about you and all your affiliate businesses?
Yeah, travischappell.com is probably a really great place to go. If you're a podcaster, a content creator, or guest or expert, and you want to learn more about Guestio, that's just over at guestio.com. And then if you want to learn how to profit more on your podcast, we have a free masterclass on that, and you can find that at podcastprofitcourse.com. You can get registered for that totally for free. Check it out.
Yeah, I saw you just literally hosted a 150 person masterclass yesterday. So I highly advise all of you guys, especially if you're a podcaster or want to get in the space, follow Travis. He actually gave me a lot of assistance and help to starting this podcast, and I still listen to him pretty regularly every week.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Travis, and thank all of you guys for listening. We'll catch you next time.